The sun had barely risen when Daniel opened his eyes. He stared at the ceiling of his apartment for a few minutes, torn between the desire to get up and start his day and the tempting comfort of his bed. With a sigh, he picked up his phone. 5 minutes of news turned into 30. When he finally got up, he was already late. "I'll start earlier tomorrow," he thought, repeating the same promise he'd been making for months. On the corner of his building was a small bookstore. A window display caught his attention. "The War of Art. Break through the blocks and win your inner creative battles." Daniel stopped, looking at the book with curiosity. Something about that title touched him deeply. He entered the store and flipped through a few pages. There is an enemy, a powerful, relentless, tireless, and invisible enemy. Every day it wakes up with a single goal: to prevent you from doing what you came to the world to do. Those words hit Daniel like a punch to the stomach. He bought the book immediately. Daniel was 34 years old with a dream tucked away in a drawer. Since childhood, he loved writing stories, but his passion was left behind while he built a safe career in technology. He told himself that one day he would return to writing, but that day never came. In his apartment, absorbed in reading his new book, Daniel discovered a name for his greatest adversary: resistance. "Resistance isn't something external," he read. "It comes from within. It's the force that opposes any attempt to elevate ourselves to a higher level of existence." He recognized patterns in his own life: the blank computer screen that seemed to exert a centrifugal force pushing him anywhere but to the chair where he should be writing. The promises of "I'll start next week" that lasted for years. The TV that offered immediate gratification, while his dreams required disciplined work. The various excuses, always sophisticated and seemingly valid. "I'm too busy right now. When I retire, I'll have time. I need to study more before I start." Resistance is universal and impersonal, the reading continued. It's nothing personal against you. It's a natural force like gravity whose sole purpose is to prevent you from growing. It was as if someone had precisely described the invisible battle he fought every day without even knowing it. A week later, Daniel met his old friend Miguel at a cafe. Miguel had followed a different path. Since he was young, he wanted to be a visual artist, and despite all the difficulties, he pursued his dream. He wasn't famous or rich, but he had regular exhibitions of his work in local galleries. "How do you do it?" Daniel asked. "How do you find time and motivation to paint every day, even after work?" Miguel smiled. "It's the opposite. If I don't paint, I feel sick. It's like it's my obligation to myself. I'm a professional." "Professional?" Daniel was puzzled. "But you work at a school." "Being professional isn't about making money from what you do," Miguel explained. "It's about attitude. Every day, no matter what happens, I sit down and paint. Even if it's just for an hour. No excuses." Miguel told him about his routine, how he woke up earlier to have time to paint, how he organized his workspace almost like a ritual, how he didn't wait for inspiration, but created conditions for it to appear. Do you know what Somerset Maugham said when asked if he only wrote when he felt inspired? "Yes, but fortunately inspiration strikes punctually at 9 o'clock every morning." Daniel laughed, but the answer made him think. All his life he had waited to feel inspired to write. He waited for the perfect moment, which never came. On his way home, Daniel passed a small gallery. There was a painting exhibition. One painting in particular caught his attention. It showed a man sitting at a desk facing a blank canvas, while sinister shadows seemed to pull him away. The title of the work? Resistance. That night Daniel couldn't sleep. The words from the book and the conversation with Miguel hammered in his mind. He got up and went to his office. He looked at the computer, feeling the familiar wave of aversion. Why was it so hard to simply sit down and begin? He remembered what he had read in the book. Resistance is strongest when the work is most important to the evolution of your soul. That made sense. If writing meant nothing to him, there would be no resistance. The size of the block was proportional to the importance of that dream in his life. Daniel turned on the computer. He opened a new document. The cursor blinked, taunting him. He remembered advice from the book. When you turn pro, everything changes. You don't wait to feel good or inspired. You go to work even if you're sick or tired, like a doctor attending an emergency or a firefighter responding to a call. Daniel set a simple goal. 30 minutes of writing every day, no exceptions. The quality didn't matter. The quantity didn't matter. What mattered was sitting down and doing it. It was like being an employee of himself. As the book suggested, he mentally created Daniel Inc., a company where part of him was the boss and part the employee. The boss would not accept excuses. That night, he wrote for exactly 32 minutes. He didn't produce anything extraordinary, just a few pages of a story he would probably rewrite later. But when he finished, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Peace. The sensation of having fulfilled a commitment to himself. Weeks passed. Daniel kept his promise. Every day, without fail, he sat down to write. Some days were good, others terrible. There were mornings when words flowed like water, and nights when each sentence was a battle. Resistance didn't disappear. It just changed tactics. When Daniel began to take writing seriously, strange things happened. His boss suddenly gave him more demanding projects. Friends called him to go out at precisely the time he had set aside for writing. Even his computer seemed to conspire, presenting inexplicable problems. Resistance recruits allies, the book said. Daniel smiled, recognizing the pattern. One Saturday, when he was about to begin his writing session, his best friend called. "I'm stopping by your place in 15 minutes. I found tickets for that show you wanted to see." The temptation was enormous. Daniel loved that band. "I can't," he said. "I'm in the middle of my work." "Work? But it's Saturday." "It's my commitment to myself," Daniel replied. "I can meet you all later." When he hung up, he felt a strange mixture of sadness and pride. Sadness for missing the start of the show, pride for honoring his commitment. That night he wrote one of the best pages of his life. As months passed, something curious happened. Daniel began to notice that his mood improved significantly after his writing sessions. Even on bad days when he felt tired or worried after writing, a sense of calm enveloped him. It was as if that space, his desk, his computer, his words, was a territory that nourished him. He invested energy there, and somehow, that energy returned multiplied. One day he had a heated argument at work. He returned home furious. His first reaction was to turn on the TV and lose himself in some mindless program to forget. But instead, he sat down to write. He began by describing his anger, then transformed it into a scene for his character. When he finished, the anger had completely dissipated. His territory had healed him. Daniel remembered what he had read about territorial orientation versus hierarchical orientation. Hierarchical orientation was always looking outward, comparing yourself with other writers, worrying about what critics would say, seeking external validation. Territorial orientation was investing in your space, doing the work for the work's sake, nourishing yourself through the very act of creating. Schwarzenegger goes to the gym when he's depressed, the book said. Stevie Wonder goes to the piano when he's depressed. Daniel smiled. Now he had his own territory. One morning, while walking through the park after his writing session, Daniel had a sudden idea to solve a problem in his story that had been bothering him for weeks. The solution came so clearly, so perfectly formed that it seemed to have been whispered in his ear. It wasn't something he had consciously thought about. It simply appeared. He then remembered another concept from the book. The idea of muses, higher forces, that inspire those who are prepared to receive. The Kabbalists believe that over each blade of grass there is an angel crying, "Grow, grow." I go further. I believe that above all humanity there is a super angel crying, "Evolve, evolve." Daniel had never been particularly spiritual, but he was beginning to understand what the author meant. The more disciplined he became, the more these creative coincidences occurred. Ideas came when he least expected them. Solutions to narrative problems emerged during walks or in the shower. He began carrying a small notebook. He noted these sudden inspirations, treating them as precious gifts. In one of his writing sessions, he had an extraordinary experience. For almost 2 hours, he wrote as if in a trance. The words flowed effortlessly, as if someone were dictating. When he finished, he reread the text and could hardly believe he had written it himself. That night, he remembered another passage from the book. The true artist knows that he doesn't own beauty. He just creates conditions for beauty to manifest through him. After a year of disciplined work, Daniel finished his novel. It was a modest work, but honest. A story about an ordinary man discovering his own voice. He sent the manuscript to a few publishers without great expectations. While waiting for responses, he continued his daily writing routine, starting a new project. On a Thursday, he received an email from a small independent publisher, interested in publishing his book. The joy was immense. Someone actually cared about his words. But then came doubt. What if the book was a failure? What if critics destroyed it? What if no one bought it? Daniel returned to the book that had changed his life and reread a passage about the Bhagavad Gita. You have a right to your actions, but never to your actions' fruits. He finally understood that the true gift had been the process itself. The daily discipline, the battle against resistance, the meeting with himself in the words he wrote. That was the real treasure. The commercial success or failure of the book was secondary. What mattered was having said his word to the world. 6 months later, his novel was published. It didn't become a bestseller, but it found faithful readers. Daniel received some letters from people who deeply identified with his story. One of them, from a 22-year-old, said, "Your book made me realize that I also have a voice. I started writing every day. Thank you for sharing your story." Daniel reread that letter several times, with tears in his eyes. His work had touched someone. The word he came to the world to say had found ears. It was like the story he had read about Phidippides, the runner from ancient Greece, who ran from Marathon to Athens to announce the victory against the Persians. Exhausted, he had only enough breath to say, "We have won," before falling dead. If he hadn't said that word, Athens might have been destroyed. Each human being comes to the world with a unique word to say. If we don't say it, something is lost forever. Years passed. Daniel published 2 more books. He continued working in technology, but now his identity was firmly anchored in his vocation as a writer. One day, passing by the same bookstore where it all began, he saw a young man looking at his latest book in the window. The young man entered, flipped through a few pages, and decided to buy it. Daniel smiled. The wheel had turned. Perhaps that book would awaken something in the young man, just as the war of art had awakened in him. Resistance was still there, every day. It never completely disappeared. But now he recognized it for what it was, a sign that the work mattered. The greater the resistance, the more important the work was to his soul. Each morning when sitting down to write, Daniel repeated to himself, "This is my territory. This is the place where I leave my mark on the world." There exists within each of us an invisible battle. On one side, resistance, that force that pulls us down, keeps us small, makes us postpone our most precious dreams. On the other, the call of our true nature, that persistent whisper that reminds us of what we came to do in the world. Resistance manifests in 1,000 disguises: procrastination, fear, self-criticism, distractions, seemingly reasonable excuses. It's universal and affects everyone. What differentiates those who achieve their dreams from those who keep them eternally tucked away in drawers is not the absence of resistance, but the determination to face it daily. We become professionals not when we get paid for our work, but when we adopt the mindset of constant discipline, of unwavering commitment. When we treat our vocation with the same seriousness that we treat our physical survival. Our territory, that space where we exercise our vocation, becomes a source of energy and healing. The more we invest in it, the more it nourishes us. Unlike hierarchical orientation, which always looks outward seeking comparisons and validation, territorial orientation teaches us to create for love of the work itself. And when we persevere, something mysterious happens. higher forces begin to work in our favor. Call them muses, inspiration, or simply the manifestation of our highest potential. They are allies that approach those who demonstrate commitment and humility. The universe is a great puzzle where each of us brings a unique piece. Each human being comes to the world with a word to say, a gift to offer. If we do not fulfill our part, something will forever remain unsaid, undone, uncreated. As William Blake said, eternity is in love with the productions of time. Our task is to create conditions for the eternal to manifest through us in time. The unlived life, that of postponed dreams, undeveloped talents, unspoken words, exacts its price in the form of existential anguish, inner emptiness, and often in physical and psychological pathologies. We did not come to the world merely to survive and procreate. We came to leave a human mark, to elevate ourselves beyond the merely animal condition. Therefore, the question that challenges us is not whether we will face resistance, that is guaranteed, but whether we will have the courage to confront it daily, with the persistence of a professional, the devotion of an artist, and the determination of one who recognizes their unique mission in the world. As the ancient proverb says, necessity teaches the frog to jump. May we feel the urgent necessity to express who we truly are, to do the work for which we were born, to say our word before time runs out. The world awaits what only you can offer.